in the next few minutes, I'd like to just give a layman an idea of what we're looking at here and why this looks weird to someone who does Coptic. And I'm going to look at three areas that are very simple and look at them very quickly. The first is the ductus. So this is the scribal hand, how the scribe actually wrote particular characters. The second is the writing instrument and the ink that were used. We can tell some things by looking about it, about what was going on in the actual production of this manuscript. And the third is the textual content, the things that are actually written. This is the text, what it says, the language. And all of these things, as I'm going to show you, are a bit peculiar. So here's a picture of our manuscript. I'm going to pick out one word, and it's a simple word. If you learn Coptic, this is one of the first words you learn. It's the word and, or awo. And I've got three pictures of the word awo here. The first is from the Gospel of JesusWife. The second is from a Middle Egyptian codex. It's a different kind of Coptic. It's from a Middle Egyptian codex that's called the Scoian Codex, and it's very famous. It's a text of Matthew's Gospel. And the last is from one of the Nag Hammadi codices, but it's from one of the bindings, and so this is considered pretty genuinely a very early manuscript of the Coptic Bible. This is Genesis, and this is Matthew. It's the same word. There's a little dialectal variation in spelling with the middle one. When we look at this one from Matthew's Gospel in Middle Egyptian, notice how the A curves and moves. None of the lines are perfectly straight. The omicron is round, but not perfectly round. It becomes thinner at the top, thicker at the sides. The epsilon, we can see where the scribe has begun and created a circle before he came down and did the same on the other side. Likewise here, with omega, it's not completely geometric. It's not perfect. Yet at the same time, there's a fluidity to it. It's the same way that a normal person has writing. They have idiosyncrasies to their letters, but in their letters you can see the flow of their writing. You can see the way that they're writing every single day as they write these letters again and again and again. The same thing with the Genesis fragment. The alpha swoops down. It's not the same level of thickness throughout. Here with epsilon, the scribe comes down and he almost makes an X. He switches across and comes up to produce this triangular bottom. You have a thin start with the omega. He's able to make it very thin here, and then on the other side, he graduates between thick and thin again. Not with the Gospel of JesusWife. We have these brutal strokes. They're all pretty much thick. They're all straight. In the case of the omega, we have a particularly weird letter which doesn't go all the way up. Omegas generally go to the top. Some of them even go above the top. Brings us to the next question. What was the scribe writing with? He wasn't writing in a way that looks fluid or normal like in other Coptic manuscripts. He's obviously not writing in a really formal kind of way, but he's not doing the kind of idiosyncrasies you see in a typical informal hand or in a semi-literary text or something like that. But what was the scribe writing with? I'm going to pick on one of the weirdest parts of the manuscript. There's some discussion right now as to what this line actually says, and I won't get into this. But I'll note here where we have this word shafina, which could be interpreted a few different ways. The thickness is very different in the letters. The epsilon is very thick compared to the shine that's here. You can also see that there's an unevenness in the ink. Sometimes ink is missing, it's splotchy, it's darker in some places in the letter than the other. It's as if the writing instrument isn't making the same contact. It's not even. At some point, it's putting down more ink. Other points, it's putting down less. And what this has caused us to say is that the scribe is not using one of the two normal tools that we see with manuscripts. The scribe isn't using a stylus or a calamus. He's not using the metal pen of the Roman world or the reed that's been used throughout Egypt. He's using either a paintbrush or a marker, maybe, in the case of a modern forgery. In either case, something fishy is going on here that we don't normally see. Now, one way of explaining this is you could say, well, it is a particularly small manuscript. We see these pictures on the internet and it looks big, but indeed it's really not that big. It could fit in the palm of your hand. So maybe the reason that we have this is because the scribe is using a dulled calamus, or the scribe is just writing so small it's impossible to write these letters. They're approximately 4 millimeters high. Well, we do have evidence from antiquity of some rather small codices. This codex is about something like 4 centimeters each way. It's even smaller than the manuscript we have here in terms of the character formation. And yet when we look at the Greek manuscript, if we look at the word chi, we can see the scribe's still able to make a chi that is very readable and very nice. It has, as in the other manuscripts, you can see that it graduates from thick to thin. The letters aren't straight and brutal like the other ones. They have a very organic feel. It's very much possible to write small letters and to do them in a way. I would challenge you, maybe especially if you know another alphabet, try and write a letter in the other alphabet, or even a few words that are about 1/2 centimeter tall. Then try again and write your own name 1/2 centimeter tall. If you're writing in a way that you're used to, and you're writing with a good instrument, you can do it. You can write very small letters. They could do it in antiquity. We can do it today. And when you look at those letters, if it's a writing system you're used to, it will look normal. If not, it will look like this manuscript. The textual content, there are a lot of blogs that are going into this, especially with things that have been done by Francis Watson, showing that the text of this manuscript looks a whole lot like bits out of the Gospel of Thomas. I'll just say 2 things. First off, when I, on a day-to-day basis, am transcribing manuscripts for my research project, sometimes I get a little manuscript it's small, maybe even bigger than this, and I spend a day or 2 trying to figure out what the text is using powerful search software with all kinds of different texts in it. But this manuscript, it's just too easy. If we look at the amount of sentences that show up in this manuscript, where we have essentially the subject and the verb staring right at us, it's most of the manuscript. This looks just like something somebody made. It doesn't look like the normal manuscripts that those of us who are digging through the piles are finding. It's too easy. The other thing I'll say is that typically when we have manuscripts that present a heterodox Jesus, that Jesus is doing things that the mainstream manuscripts don't tell us about, those manuscripts don't show up in pure Sahidic like we have here. Now, if this is the Gospel of Thomas, and there's some indications that it is, then perhaps it does have a basis that's slightly outside of the realm of Sahidic. But it looks like, in terms of being a very easy dialect, it looks like the kind of document that someone who's had 1 year to 2 years of Coptic would produce. So at the end of the day, the question is, what do we do with this manuscript? Now, we can say that it's possible that the manuscript is real, and we can say it's probable that it's a fake. For me, it's very important to look at this and to recognize that it is very probable that it's a fake. I hear a lot of people on the internet right now saying it doesn't really matter, because even if it's real, we know that historical Jesus wasn't married. But the problem is, it is very important whether this is a fake or not, because it comes down to the question of how we act as scholars. It comes down to the question of whether it's right to manipulate the media to create a lot of personal attention to promote ourselves and our personal scholarship. There's a right way of doing things, and there's a wrong way of doing things. And in this case, I think that this has been hyped. I think that making deals with media outlets 2 weeks in advance was not the right thing to do. I think it produced a kind of hype that actually detracted from our conference as we were looking at these things. It actually pulled away from our ability to look at this. And I would suggest that if you have a manuscript and there are serious questions, all the more is it important to engage in real scholarly dialogue, to bring in voices from all sides and to think through the questions. Thanks.